Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. I have with me Mr. Kanwal Sibal, the former Foreign Secretary of Bharat, and he will throw some light on what's happening with regards the India and West relations because things seem to be going in good directions and bad at the same time. So, namaskar, sir. Thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
joining. Sir, I wanted to ask you before we begin, what's your opinion on what's happening in the States? I mean, there's a lot of turmoil with regards to Trump and Biden.
Well, I think the American democracy is making a spectacle of itself. And what is very ironical is that the spread of democracy, the values of democracy, is one of the central features of America's foreign policy. And they have this new discourse about authoritarian regimes versus democratic regimes. Now, in that context, America has to give an example, not only of a functioning democracy, but one that you could look up to as a real model
Mhm.
to follow. But the message that is coming out is just the contrary. The American democracy is in a mess, uh, where you have a sitting president who has been accused of having some problems of, you know, cognitive problems. Uh, and we have seen, in actual fact, that in the last debate he had with Trump, that he had some problem in enunciating his words, and he seemed to be at one moment he lost track of what he was saying. But leave that aside. And then on the other hand, you have another contender for the presidency, whom we do not look very adversely in India. But if you look beyond the bilateral aspect, because Modi had good equations with him, he is a bit of a narcissist, unpredictable. His personal life is certainly not one of a role model. He's very unpredictable. He's very impulsive, and he can actually uh, pursue policies that can cause a lot of problems all around the world, which we can also suffer from. Because if he destabilizes international relations with the kind of views that he has, we cannot be immune from his fallout. The point I'm making is that the country, which is the biggest economy in the world, the biggest technology power, uh, controls the financial flows throughout. Its currency is the reserve currency of the world. It is the strongest military power. And you have a governance system in the country which is unpredictable, which cannot throw up real statesmen as leaders who can have a very broad geopolitical view of the world, which is not based on asserting US hegemony, but actually moving forward on a multilateral basis, giving space to others to also have part in international governance, so that you have a much more, if you like the word, collegial way of running the system. But anyway, uh, the long and short of it is that we will see now what happens. It seems to me that President Trump is a shoe-in, although a lot of effort is being made to project Kamala Harris as a contender. She has been endorsed by President Biden. But interestingly, the former President Barack Obama
Yes, sir.
has not endorsed her. He has actually called for the Democratic Convention to choose the right leader. But I can see there are a lot of forces which are behind the nomination. And I just saw that within 24 hours, $80 million has been collected for her, which means that the big capital
Mhm.
is behind her. Now, assuming, okay, there's an interesting view that I've been hearing here, which is that uh, the Trump team might have actually preferred Biden to continue because they could have kept hammering at him about his cognitive
Yeah,
difficulties,
fair enough.
about his son, about his corruption, making the best of of the spectacle he made of himself in the debate, etc., etc. But when Kamala Harris, if she is the candidate, contending candidate, then he won't be able to attack her the way Trump was attacking Biden. First of all, she's a woman, so that will sort of hamper a little bit his style. Although he's been quite unsparing of her in terms of criticism. Um, and then, of course, she belongs to the so-called minority
Mhm.
community. A lot of blacks actually have been moving into the Trump camp.
Yeah.
Uh, so that also could be influenced uh, because of Kamala Harris's candidature. And finally, what would Kamala Harris's candidature, if she becomes president, mean for India? I don't think very much, because she has kept her distance from India. As you know, she was invited by Prime Minister Modi to visit India. She never visited India. She doesn't identify herself with India. She belongs to the progressive democratic camp. And part of the reason we've been having difficulty with the left wing progressive elements of the Democratic Party is because, I suppose, it, to some extent, because of people like her. So we shouldn't count too much on the fact that she's of half Indian origin, just as we couldn't rely too much on Rishi Sunak as being
Mhm.
pure of Indian origin. So, but anyway, let's see. The jury is still out.
So the interesting thing that I want to, take up is the factor that when you see the narrative that is being put across on both the sides of the world, um, Prime Minister Modi, it was, oh, the democracy will be finished. There won't be any other election, autocratic, and a religious nationalism sort of attack. If you see Trump, is the same thing. There won't be democracy, elections will be finished, autocratic, and white nationalist Christian. Um, how do you see this? Is this their playbook?
Well, this comparison is not valid. After all, sometimes I ask myself what kind of a democracy is the United States, where you effectively have only two parties.
Hmm.
Now, can you imagine a real democracy where views differ and there are a whole lot of people who have different agendas and would be free to form their own parties? Uh, but in the United States, you're either a Republican or a Democrat.
Democrat.
And then at the end of the day, they say that, look, it doesn't matter. The elections really don't matter insofar as the national scene is concerned. Ultimately, it is decided by 6 or 7 states. And where the people in between who are neither committed to the Democrats or Republicans vote. And
Hmm.
that is where the election is, is decided. So I think making a, and then there is an electoral college system in United States where you can win the majority vote and you still cannot come to power. So making comparison between what's happening in America and what's happening in India, to my mind, is not valid at all. Our democracy is very, very, very different. We are a hugely diverse country. Uh, we have the kind of regional politics uh, which the United States doesn't have. Uh, on some issues, yes, their domestic agenda differs in terms of what the states feel about it. California is highly progressive, highly leftist. Some states are more conservative, etc., etc. But when it comes to uh, the American system as a whole, it is
Mhm.
very different from the Indian system. So, whether if Trump is right wing, if he's supported by conservative elements, if they are right wing Christian fundamentalists who also back him, if the gun lobby backs him, uh, these are very specific to the United States and is a consequence of what has happened in the United States in terms of immigration, in terms of the erosion of the middle class, the kind of lobby that Vance represents. I read his book, The Hillbilly Elegy. Uh, so the the Midwestern states, the hollowing out of the economy of these states, the social problems faced by these states, the fact that the whites fear they are going to be very soon be a minority in the country, and look at this in the background of how United States was created, the racism, slavery, and everything else. Uh, so the roots of the kind of politics uh, uh, Trump is pursuing and his supporters is very different from the Indian system. So you can make these artificial comparisons where you divide uh, politics in various countries into right wing and left wing, and then you sort of bracket, uh, leaders in some other countries uh, as right wing or left wing, fitting into the framework that the West has created.
Hmm.
Now, Prime Minister Modi, one can argue, is both right wing and left wing. Right wing in terms of what you might call religious nationalism, but left wing in terms of his welfare schemes. He's
Mm.
very left wing in terms of that. So, so I don't accept that. I don't accept that comparison about. There has been. I know there has been this narrative where they fit Modi with people like Viktor Orban, with people like uh, Erdogan uh, and Trump. But this is the narrative of the American Western media.
It's very interesting, sir, because when we see, especially when uh, the visit to Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia, you could see literally a sort of a meltdown. And you know what? How do you analyze as a former diplomat? So how do you analyze three different narratives coming from three different establishments of the U.S. government? State Department said we are concerned, and we've shared our concerns, and Defense Department says we trust India to kind of find a way through this conflict, and the White House says if it's India, Modi is the only, probably the only leader in the world who can tell President Putin to stop this brutal war. How do you see these three diametrically opposite sort of statements coming from them?
No, I don't see there is any serious division in the in the United States
Mhm.
on this. They are caught in a, from their point of view, in a dilemma. India is a rising power, economically becoming very attractive. It has moved very closely uh, towards the United States. We've signed on the defense side all these foundational agreements. We are buying a lot of weaponry from there. In so many other areas, uh, India and United States are coming very close together. Their consultancy companies have run over have complete access to our policy makers. They shape internally, or at least help shape and influence our internal policies on the
Yeah.
economic side, on restructuring, on regulation, on everything else. Uh, then on bigger issues like climate change, uh, cooperation with India is vital. Uh, and then with the new profile that we've got, or rather, it's an old profile, but it's been a rejuvenated profile
Mm.
of leader of the global south. That gives us a certain stature. And then the fact that we are part of BRICS and Quad, not Quad, SCO, which means that we have a foot in that door,
Yeah.
sends a message to the United States and the West that we have options. And they don't want us to go too far down that road, alienate us to that extent that we begin to see that there's much more value in those ties, uh, or rather, that we should actually emphasize those ties in order to have more room for maneuver with the bigger West, because the manner in which they keep attacking us. So there are, and then there is this whole business about democracy and human rights and minority rights, which is a very powerful element in their system. How sincere it is, how committed they really are to these things can always be questioned. But
Mm.
nevertheless, in terms of rhetoric, in terms of public appeal, in terms of discourse, there's a very powerful element in the U.S. system, and they are and the Congress asked the State Department to produce an annual report on human rights, uh, and then an annual report on religious freedoms in India. And then there are these other organizations, democracy promotion, human rights promotion organizations, civil society organizations. They are busy giving, ranking India, you know, in sort of rather, uh, how should I say, uh, astonishing ways where they rank us below countries like, I don't know, Afghanistan or but Myanmar,
Pakistan.
something else, whatever else. So that is another part of the American system, and there is behind that uh, foundations, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford
Yeah.
Foundation, Open Society Foundation, and this and that. So it's a mix, it's a hodgepodge, and there are all these lobbies that are work. So what you see are different statements coming out. Is is a fallout of that kind of those kind of currents within the system, where the State Department has to make a statement to pander to the human rights organization, democracy promotion organizations, certain elements in the Congress. The Pentagon sees the bigger picture, but essentially the military picture, and where India fits in, the China threat. And for them,
Mm.
India is far more valuable. They're not interested in this human rights stuff uh, because they're not mandated by the Congress to produce reports like that. And the White House is a sort of, uh, combines within itself these various views and then takes a larger view in terms of keeping a balance in the relationship. This, of course, varies. It depends on the personality of the National Security Council advisor. Jake Sullivan tries to handle things in as balanced a manner as possible. He's been leading the charge with regard to uh, cooperation in emerging and critical technologies. He's in constant touch with our national security advisor. He has a certain discourse, uh, but he also has to pander to these lobbies, and therefore on the Panoon affair, he keeps breaking it up periodically and demand satisfaction. But at the same time, says we are having a constructive dialogue behind the scenes with India, and we don't want to talk too much about this in the open because that's not helpful. But nevertheless, we are watching very closely, and we will make sure that we are satisfied with what the U.S. Indian government does. So there is pressure, and at the same time, there is an effort to make it to adopt a tone which is less belligerent
Mm.
uh, than some of the outspoken people on the American side.
You know, the most interesting thing that we see right now is the front face, which is the US, which is kind of taking the forefront in all these things. The rest of the country is kind of faded away. UK is in its own issues right now. It's just the Americans and the Canadians that are trying to continue this narrative up on, especially for the global South. So, how do you look at the recent events in Bangladesh, sir, which is also again this whole cookie land nonsense which came out, and Sheikh Hasina is pretty hardcore on it, and the recent events in Bangladesh also, stir to the factor that there is foreign interference because the BNP, the leader sits in UK, sits
Yeah.
in America, the Mushfaqil Fazal Ansari, that infamous journalist who keeps prodding the State Department on India questions. How do you see this interaction, if I may use that word, or interference, if I may, in these countries?
Well, on Bangladesh, whether United States still factors in formulating its thinking and approach, the fact that they were against the creation of Bangladesh,
Mm,
uh, I don't know because it's difficult to understand why they keep pressure on Sheikh Hasina and actually don't support her because she's
mm,
trying to curb the Islamic elements in the country. Uh, Not that she doesn't have truck with some of them, the party, I mean, but she's trying to control them, which of course is good for us, very good for us. At the same time, there's been a total sea change in our ties with regard to with
mm,
Bangladesh, with regard to transit rights and connectivity. Because from my own time as foreign secretary, when I was talking to the BNP leader at that time, she actually refused to talk to me about the transit, saying politically I can't talk to you. But look at the sea change that has occurred since then. United States should be aware that for us, stable relationship uh, and stability in Bangladesh are very important in terms of our own security and our Act East policy. And our Act East policy, which is intended in part to counter China, is geopolitically helpful to the United States. So as it is, we not Pakistan is a huge problem for us in the West. So why should the United States and others actually not help us
Hmm.
in making sure that there is stability to the East, rather than also creating tensions for us in the West? Because if there's a change in government, if the BNP comes to power, then we have difficulties. So they're cognizant of this. They're not fools. They understand the situation. So why are they doing it? In Myanmar already there is a huge instability. Add to that problems in Bangladesh, and we have our entire Act East policy that goes for the six. And in any case, then we have huge instability to our east. So uh, and then this whole issue about uh, lack of democracy in Bangladesh, and the
Hmm.
fact that Sheikh Hasina had actually in the past he has imprisoned the leadership. The BNP leader is still in prison, etc., etc. But these are internal dynamics in Bangladesh. So why should United States or the UK or sitting afar uh, unnecessarily interfere uh, in the internal affairs of countries like Bangladesh, and not look at the big picture, uh, regional picture, which is very important. So what impels them? Very difficult to, frankly, if you ask me, very difficult to judge. Why, if India and United States are talking about regional cooperation uh, and the larger issue of stabilizing this region and making sure that the Chinese penetration of this region, which cannot be arrested but which can be slowed down or which can be countered, in that background, to work with us to stabilize this region rather than creating issues for us and making the management of this region much more difficult to us. With great difficulty, Sheikh Hasina cooperated with us to suppress the, uh, you know, the uh, terrorists and rebels which were sheltered in Bangladesh and which were creating
Hmm.
problems
Hmm.
for us. Uh, Now that was a big gain for us. But if the internal situation changes there, it's a problem for us. And then there is this issue of minorities in Bangladesh, Hindu minorities, which are being squeezed out. There are a lot of extremist elements in Bangladesh too. So why should the United States or anybody else actually indirectly encourage these elements and give them the impression that they have supporters or protectors in the Western world, and that there is pressure on Sheikh Hasina
Hmm.
to follow a different course of action and gives more space to these elements who do politics within the country? Who would that be helpful to?
You that's quite an interesting thought, I must say, sir, because it doesn't serve their purpose itself. It's not that it's they use these political weapons to create leverage and create influence, but it doesn't. At the end of it, in the larger picture of it, it doesn't serve their purpose. Which brings me to an interesting question. So, what is it that the West wants from India? Because this is one question: do they want us to sign an alliance? Do they want us to become like Japan, Germany, South Korea? What is it that they want? Because they keep telling us no, no, this, no, no, that. But is there a
Well, you know, frankly, uh, this cannot be a one-way street. I mean, the
yeah?
question you put is very relevant. But to say what do they want for us, I would say, well, what do we want from them?
Hmm.
I mean, there has to be a middle ground. They may have some expectations from us, but we have expectations of them. And do we meet each other's expectations or not? Uh, I think if you are an American, what would they want from India? Firstly, at the end of the day, they have learned to respect India a little bit in the last couple of decades. Uh, Before that, frankly, they didn't have much respect for India uh, because India was seen to be a country which was mired in serious domestic issues, not a player on the global stage, didn't have the capacity to do so, uh, didn't have any economic muscle. Um, Big country, yes,
Mm.
but a big country with the potential, like Brazil, they would say big country with potential. So the narrative was that yes, the big country it has potential. Now India is realizing its potential, not fully, but realizing its potential. So it's a different India. Uh, but they have to get out of the mindset that India uh, has and will carve out for itself a degree of independence in external affairs and keep what is called a strategic autonomy. Uh, they don't like that. You've seen the American ambassador recently in his
Yeah.
somewhere saying that at the end of the day, when there's a
Don't
conflict
take this for
situation,
granted.
there is no strategic autonomy. So what is he trying to say? I mean, the country that has the greatest attachment to strategic autonomy is the United States of America.
Mhm.
They want to be everywhere. They want to control events everywhere. They work with the countries which are inimical to each other. For years, they've done that. Israel, Egypt. Um Now there's been a change in their approach to Palestine, but they have been the promoters of all the talks between the PLO
Yeah.
and the Israeli government, between Pakistan and India for a long time. Uh, Similarly, uh, wherever uh, they have where they have interests in a region and there are tensions between countries in that region, they have a foot in every camp, in either camp, so that nothing can be done there without they overseeing it and making sure that it is within the overall ambit of their uh, national interest. That's why they. But when it comes to India having strategic autonomy and to some extent compatible with the degree of power we have, uh,
Mm.
we also pursue the same route. It doesn't fit into their larger thinking. So they want India to be with them. And then if they have enemies, then India should also treat their enemies as more or less our enemy too. And if they have friends, then we should treat those friends as our uh, friends too. And if there are differences in view, then they can disregard what we think because they will fit their policy uh, into a paradigm which looks after essentially their interests and then throw sops at us here and there to make sure that we are not too dissatisfied. So it's a question of fitting United India into a larger jigsaw puzzle of United States international hegemony, because they're present everywhere. So it's a jigsaw puzzle. So where do they fit in India?
Mm.
After all, United States is a global power. We are not a global power. We have a regional power with a fit, footprint that is extending, that is enlarging. So how to from the United States? The problem is how to fit in India with their larger global design. Now, when
Mm.
it comes to China, we fit in well to a large extent, although not fully, because China they see as they call the pacing threat, as the only country that can really challenge, which is true, challenge U.S. Power. United States and China is becoming stronger by the day, economically, militarily, notwithstanding the current economic issues that might be facing Xi Jinping. And China is flexing its muscles. United States is becoming more and more aware that by themselves they cannot deal with China. They need partners. So far as Japan and South Korea and Philippines now. are concerned, they are allies. They have physical, they have military forces present in those countries. They have huge deployments of their military assets in those countries. They have bases in those countries. So they are the principal partners insofar as the security of that region is concerned and America's interests are concerned. But since China is in expanding global power and the Indian Ocean is the artery, one of the big arteries for their international role, which is a country which can therefore uh, create issues for China. And if some cut that artery, if there's a need to do that. And India stands out because there is no other naval power in the region, right from Australia to the east coast of
Mm.
Africa, which can play this role. So the Pentagon understands that. State Department, White House, they understand that. So they therefore attach importance to India in that geopolitical context, essentially in relation to China. But there are a lot of inconsistencies in this because if that was the axe on which the United States was fashioning its geopolitics in our region, then they should be much more careful about what they're doing in Myanmar instead of pushing Myanmar more and more into the Chinese camp. They know that China has made a lot of inroads into Bangladesh, but they are again creating problems.
Doing the same thing.
When it comes to Pakistan, they have never really raised their voice about the CPEC. Uh, they have never treated POK as Indian territory because their position on Kashmir, although it has evolved, but not to the extent where they recognize the full sovereignty of India over Jammu and
Mm.
Kashmir. And they know that this artery that they're building from China through CPEC to Gwadar and eventually a naval base is an extension of Chinese power. When it comes to Iran, they have a particular policy towards Iran, which is greatly um, fashioned by Israeli concerns, but it had an impact on us.
Yeah.
And our natural relationship with Iran has been disturbed, and more Iran is moving into the Chinese camp. Uh, so they, and then on top of that, they're weakening us from within
Hmm.
domestically by targeting Modi and the BJP and Hindutva and democracy and minority rights, commenting on minor. Can you imagine the world's biggest power commenting on CA or some incident or even Manipur? I mean, come on, come on. Are these the real geopolitical issues of the day?
Yeah.
But they do it. Um, so this is the way to answer your question. This is the way to keep pressure on India, where they have not reconciled in their minds whether India should be given the kind of free-handed wants. Yes, they value India, but do they value India with sort of where they can pull some strings in order to keep pressure on India, or that is where the problem lies. Now, just to complete the point, we have, let's say, our relationship with Russia. Russia never comments on our internal affairs.
Yep.
So those people will say, well, Russia is not a democracy. They don't themselves observe the human rights. So why the hell should they bother about this? Point is not this. Point is this, that we are dealing with a power which consistently, historically, for whatever reason, has not lectured us, given us lessons on democracy, how to manage our internal affairs, uh, keep embarrassing us internationally, put uh, long chapters in their human rights reports or religious freedom reports. That creates a certain atmosphere in the country. Of course, one can always take the view that this is what the United States is, and therefore we shouldn't get too rattled. There's nothing that we can do very much beyond this. We should look at the larger picture, keep tolerating this to the extent that we need to do so because of a national interest. Push back as
Mm.
we have push back, at least in verbal statements, uh, uh, until we are much stronger and we can push back even more effectively. This is a view one can take, but it doesn't help in trust building,
Yeah.
frankly. And that's where the United States country, the US. Now, for example, let me make this point. Now, this daily press briefing that the United States has, uh, which is a platform abused by, you mentioned this just now, a Pakistani fellow who keeps asking questions. So they keep asking questions on Indian internal affairs, and there is no way the State Department spokesman will evade that question or actually give a positive chit to India. So he
Mm.
says something which will upset us. Uh, why do they have to pronounce on global affairs daily?
Yep.
Uh, uh, but the reason is that they want to have, it's in their system, an oversight on global affairs. That they think it's their right to pronounce on anything that's happening in any corner of the world. They should give up this, or they should find some way of saying that, look, of, of finding a response to such questions with which avoids creating. See, this is the problem. If they say something neutral, then they'll be criticized by lobbies within their own system.
Mm, yeah. Mm.
The United States is now not giving up its focus on human rights and democracy and stuff like that. It's very complicated dealing with the United States, frankly.
So just the last question before I let you go. A lot of people in India have this hope that, when Trump comes, things will become better. The Republicans are always better for us. You mentioned he's erratic and this and that, but the establishment kind of continues. So do you think this, I foresee, let me just say this, I foresee the rhetoric going away from this whole leftist propaganda to migrants, to tariffs, to stuff like that, which is more dear to Trump as far as business is concerned. Do you think they will ease up, or do you think it'll just this whole Pannu affair and this whole democracy nonsense, this will all continue? Or does Trump actually have the courage and gumption to put a stop to this nonsense as what he promises?
Well, firstly, when he was in power, it's not as if the State Department was not issuing annual reports on human rights, or
Mm,
the U.S. International Commission for Religious Freedom was not saying things, or where individual senators or congressmen were not saying things here and there, uh, or religious freedom, international religious freedom report of the State Department was not being issued. Those things were there, but you are right that in the sense that the White House would be the White House, not the State Department, would be less vocal, less focused on these issues,
mm,
and that might give us a little bit of reprieve. But what will happen is that VDEM or Amnesty International or Open Society or all these organizations which are there in the business of targeting India, they won't give up, and neither will the New York Times or Washington Post or the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Economist. They will not give up their narrative on India. That will continue, more so as there is now a belief that Modi has been weakened, and the opposition in India is becoming more and more vocal. And in
mm,
fact, earlier inhibitions that might have been there in terms of attacking Modi personally and etc. Those have actually got diluted. In fact, there's much more virulent uh, statements being made, which then are picked up by the international media. So that kind of links between India's domestic opposition and its renewed confidence and what the Western media and think tanks are purveying, that issue will remain whether Trump is in power or not in power. On the economic side, this man seems to be obsessed with Harley Davidson. Other day, again, in one of his uh, public addresses, he mentioned Harley Davidson. Though he said it's not India's fault, it's our fault.
yeah.
But he described us as the tariff king. So there'll be pressure on us. But I think, see, this is the odd thing that despite all that I've been saying about all the negative commentary by the press and think tanks, on India, uh, Modi and Biden got along well.
Yep.
And in fact, he was received very well by President Biden, given a lot of attention. Uh, so with Trump, he has some very good, he already has a good personal equation, so that will continue. But the larger picture in terms of the issues in our relationship, specifically in relation to the economy, there I think we may come under more pressure. After all, it is he who withdrew the GSP. From that is Trump that withdrew the GSP
Yeah.
preferences uh, for India. Uh, so those issues uh, will continue, but they can be fallout of a different kind on our ties because he's unpredictable. So what happens in Europe uh, can have ripple effects on the larger international canvas, and we may be faced with uh, newer situations. He's very much anti-Iran.
Hmm.
Walked out of the Iran nuclear deal. Whether he'll impose more sanctions on Iran, create more issues there. He's very, very pro-Israel. So, what will be the uh, fallout of that? How will he manage Saudi Arabia? In the case of China, uh, he's very tough, but will he be also transactional or not? Uh, let's see. I mean, what I meant is his unpredictable personality and his volatile nature, uh, and he's a disruptor. Uh, whether that would ease international tensions or regional tensions, or not very much, or add to some of them, uh, we'll see. The question mark would be Ukraine, what he does on Ukraine. On the one hand, he says that we will end the war. On the other hand, he has been uh, he's been saying in the past, as you may have yourself heard, that he's the one who imposed sanctions on Russia, that he was tougher on Russia than anybody else. So let's see. Let's see how it goes.
It's going to be interesting times ahead for India. That's actually not just for India, but for the entire world as far as the US and the West is concerned.
Because it is the strongest power in the world, and whoever governs the United States, and the policies U.S. pursues, has ripple effects everywhere. And then, of course, in terms of technology and everything else, tightening up, uh, and Trump will tighten up even more.
Hmm.
So, to what extent this may or may not affect India-U.S. Relations, it may not, but it may. I mean, these are some of the issues that are in the air.
That's there, sir. Firstly, sir, thank you so much for actually taking out the time because someone with experience can help us understand the entire gambit a little better. I keep looking at statements and stuff like that, but at a strategic level, it is very important for us to know the inside story, which isn't, you could call it encouraging or not, depending on which side you look at it from, half full or half empty. But in any case, thank you so much, sir, for the time, and always a pleasure interacting with you.
My
Jai Hind.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye.